Football made simple. Become great at your craft by finding ways to make it simple for those around you. This is the Coaching 101 podcast hosted by Findaway Productions with your co-host Daniel Chamberlain and Kenny Simpson. What's up, coaches? This is the Coaching 101 podcast. I'm Daniel Chamberlain here with Kenny Simpson. Coach, it is early in the morning. Oh, we were on the Facebook feed just a minute ago talking about it, but it's our first morning recording, getting into the holidays, and I'm sure that most people who do any kind of show recording are figuring out how they're going to get around that 2-week stretch of like, you don't want to interrupt holiday travel or Christmas or New Year's Eve. So we're going to knock out a couple of them today. So I'm pretty pumped. Get started early and get them all done.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good day and excited to kind of get everything going. Hopefully you guys in the holidays have time to listen, but it's hard to get it, you and me, kind of timed out and get it all timed up. And probably the next ones we'll be doing, I bet, are going to be at AFCA.
So we've got this one comes out tomorrow, and then the other one we're going to record will be our Christmas-ish episode, and I think we got to get one for New Year's. But yeah, we'll get 3 or 4 out of the AFCA, hopefully. If you guys show up there and you want to come over and talk some ball on the podcast, we're going to be doing some stuff live and recording it for episodes. I was trying to figure out cameras and everything earlier, so I'm going through my checklist already, getting ready for that travel. So we could be able to get everybody some video up and some good audio and just talk ball. I'm pretty pumped.
Yeah, it's going to be a good time. Clinic season is definitely upon us. I know that a lot of coaches are probably either in the job hunt search, and the AFCA, you're going to see that up close and personal, and there's resumes flying everywhere. But then there's also coaches that are happy with where they are, that are trying to get better, for what's coming.
Yeah. The job search thing is so weird to me because we have a wonderful home and a beautiful little bit of land, and we're near family, and we have a business here, and we're not going anywhere. Like, we're not going to move. And so my job hunt is reduced. You know what I mean? You get like an hour drive out of me nowadays. So
a lot of coaches I get asked all the time, why don't you go coach college? And that's been offered multiple times, but you're going to see, Daniel, and the guys that go to AFCA are going to see why I don't do that. Because those guys I feel like they got 19 shirts in their closet of different states they've lived in. And that was not in the cards for me, and not for you either, I don't think.
Right. Yeah. No, we might get one big move out of us someday. If I get offered some ridiculous job somewhere, that'll be great. But right now, man, we're just going to make do with what's around. So,
right.
Well, awesome. Well, we'll get talking here, Coach. Why don't you share some ways we can simplify football for our staff and for our players?
Coaching 101 podcast is sponsored by Findaway Productions. Findaway Productions also sponsors fbcoachsimpson.com for all your coaching needs, with over 30 coaching materials, books, as well as 50 PowerPoints and videos and smaller materials, and the free magazine headsets. Findaway Productions also sponsors offensivecoordinatoracademy.com, all things offense, and defensivecoordinatoracademy.com, all things defense.
This episode is brought to you by Athletic Speed and Movement. At athleticspeedmovement.com, we've taken Del Basket's 45 years of speed and movement training and put it all in one place just for you. You can get the same training that NFL players have been getting for years, collegiate players have been getting for years, and now high schools across the nation are paying thousands of dollars to bring Dell in to install his system, but we've got it online for you. It's time to help your team become faster, not just in the 40, not just their sprint speed, but between the tackles and their cuts while they're chasing down the quarterback. It's time for you to help them become faster everywhere. Jump over to athleticspeedmovement.com. There's an orange button there. Just click it. It says, get the keys to playing faster. You'll get the 3 core movement video from Dell. He's explaining the science behind it, all for just the price of your email. Check it out, athleticspeedmovement.com. So on today's episode, Coach, we're going to talk about quarterback development. Kind of getting it through the offseason here. We're going to set people up for success on developing their players, not even skill players, all players, right? And what drills and techniques are they using? Today we're going to look at like how early to identify a kid to play a key position, mainly talking to quarterback. But so that's kind of what we want to get into here on the podcast for a few weeks and talk about some of those positions, because there's some guys out there that year after year, I feel like they're just, you do have a best 11 mentality, and I think you should have the best 11 kids on the field. You shouldn't play a defensive end because he looks like a defensive end when another kid can do the job better. And so you know, I want to really start thinking, have coaches start thinking about how to take a kid and develop him into a position, regardless of what his body type is, right? It don't matter. It don't matter what he looks like. Can he play the position? Yes or no. It doesn't matter how old he is. Is he the best player for the position? And how can I make him even better at it moving forward? So we'll get started with quarterback because, that's every team I feel like should pretty much revolve around the quarterback. That's going to determine how successful you are each Friday night. So um, you'd mentioned you like to identify a kid early, and I think you discussed this last season, maybe even a little bit about taking a kid very, very early and seeing who can chunk the rock and make them a good player. So why don't you walk us through kind of how you're identifying those young quarterbacks and what skills you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned, you can never have too many of these kids that could play quarterback. I mean, the last thing you want to do is get caught in a year where you don't have any options at that position. And I've seen multiple years where, for me specifically, where this kid who was our guy in the 7th and 8th grade, well, now he just wants to play basketball. So you better have kind of multiple kids you're developing through this. So as you mentioned, that's one tip I give a lot of coaches is whatever level you can go down to. If that's you can only go down to 9th grade or whatever it is. We like to try to have two per grade. They can at least get in that and take a snap, and we can be functional with them. And then you mentioned also they're all different. And so being with these kids at a young age, you can kind of identify strengths they have. There are certain things we want every kid to have, and I'll go through that list here in a minute, but each kid is different. And if your offense kind of revolves around a specific skill set, like they've got to be able to do X, Y, or Z, or they have to look like X, Y, or Z, you're really going to limit your kid that you can play quarterback with. I'm a big Dolphin fan. We went and watched them get beat, unfortunately, the other Monday night. But Tua is a really good example. He's kind of that guy that when people watch him, some people think he's one of the best MVP candidates. And some people look at him and think he's a below average quarterback who has weapons around him because his skill set is not very tangible. He's not real big. He doesn't have a real big arm, but what his skill set is, and he's got a coach who's able to maximize it, is he makes really good decisions early. He's really accurate with the football, and so he's a great RPO, throw the ball on anticipation type routes, West Coast type quarterback. That's what he is. And so the Dolphins have designed their offense around that. Okay, I would imagine if the Dolphins coach had Lamar Jackson, that he would design a different looking offense. And I think a lot of times as coaches, we kind of neglect that part. You can be successful with a Josh Allen, a Lamar Jackson, a Jalen Hurts that are all athletic guys that can throw it, or a Brock Purdy, a Tua, those guys who aren't the greatest athletes but have these other skills. And so I don't want to get too far into this episode without bringing up that these guys can have different skill sets.
Yep.
As a coach, you've got to identify those. So here's what we look for, though, as we're going down to these young kids. We look for a guy who's an alpha. My best years coaching, our quarterback has been our leader. Like the best years I've had where we've gone the farthest, you can point back to a lot of different factors. But one of the factors is we had a leader at quarterback. We had a guy who didn't mean he was perfect, and they're all different. Like when I say a leader, there's lots of ways you can lead. It doesn't mean you've got to be a rah-rah guy or a big talker, or you've got to be this or that. But this guy was a leader for the team. Like the team looked to him and said, this guy's our leader. In our best years, that guy played quarterback for us. And so that's the one thing we want to do is identify these kids who have that kind of skill set that kids want to follow and they want to play hard for, and then those are the guys we want to kind of develop in that world. And then we start looking at skill sets that go with them. Because if your kids don't want to play for a guy, it really doesn't matter how talented he is. Right? Then we look for guys who are able to handle big moments, and a lot of times that is, I hate to say this, but a lot of times you're born that way. Like there are some kids that big moments, they rise up. It doesn't mean they're always perfect and that every single time I think of basketball a lot of times when I think of this, or you could think of baseball. Whatever your sport is, it's not football. If you're a basketball guy, the guy who wants the ball in his hands at the end of the game. If you think of baseball, the guy who, when there's 2 strikes, he gets the hit for whatever reason. He makes the play. Maybe he's a pitcher. and he handles the pressure well. So those are guys we want to look for because quarterback's all about handling pressure. And again, you go back to the years we've been our best. Our quarterbacks have been really good under pressure. They've made the 3rd and 10 throw. They realize the guy's not open and they just make a play on 4th and 3. Those are the guys that you're going to win a lot of games with, that handle the pressure well, and kids want to play with them. I know that's not a skill set, and I'm kind of getting into philosophy. I will get into skills. Then we look for knowledge of the game. And they don't have to be a 4.0 student. My kid this year, not a 4.0 student, but he understood football. He understood if it ain't there, don't throw it. And it's amazing how many kids don't understand that, no matter how many times you teach them that. Or throw the ball away on 4th down, or take a sack when you're in field goal range. You see this in the NFL. So it's not like this is something they can just be perfect at. However, you want a guy that kind of understands what you're wanting him to do. And that's something you can teach. I think dealing with pressure, a guy can get better with more experience, but knowledge of the game is 100% something you can teach an athlete. And so that can be a taught skill. Then we look at arm strength and accuracy. So you see how far down the list that is. It's on there. They got to be able to throw it. But we're looking for, can this kid win a game with his arm or with his legs? And if the answer is yes on either one of those, he's going to be a guy we're going to start developing as a quarterback. If the answer is yes on both of those, he's probably at the top of the chart. You look at the Dolphins, I'll go back to my Tua, because that's the guy I watch. Imagine if he could run. That's a Hall of Famer. And so if he could do both, run enough or throw enough, one or the other, and he's elite or good, really good at the other part of it, that's the guy we're going to be able to build our offense around. And also this last little part, and I'll hand it back to you, Daniel. If your scheme doesn't allow you to adjust for an elite runner at quarterback or an elite passer at quarterback, then you need to look at your scheme.
Yeah, so you talk about all those skills, and I don't have a ton of history in trying to develop quarterbacks. So the first thing I see is kids that can throw it, and I understand needing to find an athlete, right, a guy that can run. Our freshman team this year, we have an elite little wide receiver that I think he's going to go on and do some amazing things in the game of football, and I'm not sure what level will even limit him. He's pretty locked in. And, we were really trying to force him to be a running back this year. We tried to, he's always been a wide receiver. So we tried to put him back out there, but it was like halfway through the season and we've already tried to make him learn all the running back plays because we had a quarterback, right? We have the guy that's going to be the quarterback for the next several years. And then this cat just picks up a ball in the middle of wide receiver drills one day and launches a football like 55 yards down the field on a fade ball and then puts it right in the bucket. And I was like, whoa, hey, coaches, I know we got the guy, but hear me out. 2 quarterback system, because just slinging it. With no effort. It just looked effortless. And so, he was kind of what you're talking about, that running ability that was already elite. The speed, the moves, the skills, the cuts. And then now I'm just witnessing him, try to Peyton Manning this football down the field. So, I guess you can always just hope you have that kid laying around, and then and if not, you just kind of follow what you said and just start looking for those other skills to kind of stack up. Which I agree that I think you should always be able to find a kid that can do one or the other, right? There's a reason pocket quarterbacks were so good for so long. It's probably because we weren't really looking for the running skill. But once you add that into the mix, and a lot of systems nowadays are built around just let the quarterback run the ball, right? I know that you're running a ton of, RPOs and RROs, I guess, just letting the quarterback tote the rock. So there's a place for all of them now. And I still want to see a cat that, roll the footballs out there and see who can launch the football a little bit. But all the rest.
A lot of times as coaches, we look at we like to have plays on script. And so you want a guy who can make the easy plays. Like, you've designed a great play to get him an easy ball, take that ball. But the reality is a lot of big games are won, what I call off script. You designed something, they took it away. Now what's that kid gonna do? And so I think that's the skill when I say I'm looking for an elite runner. He doesn't have to be like a 4.4, but when it's not there, can he buy time and make something out of nothing? And
Right.
I go watch state championship games last couple of weeks. All of those teams had that guy. That guy who, when it wasn't there, could create something.
Yeah. Next question here, Coach, and that is, what's the best method to develop your quarterbacks? And I'm sure that every guy out there has got a different method for developing their quarterback. So what's the one that you think is the best?
Well, I think first of all, you got to identify his strengths. I think a lot of times as coaches, we have a system that we want to do and how we want to run our offense, and we want to make this kid fit that mold. And I think we need to think about it the other way, backwards. We need to think about what strengths this kid has, what my offense can do to highlight those strengths. So if he's a great thrower, then what kind of thrower does that mean? A kid with a strong arm doesn't necessarily mean he's a great passer. Like, what does he throw well? Does he throw the ball well outside of the pocket? Does he throw the ball well inside the pocket? Does he have a strong arm that he prefers deep down the field? Is he, maybe doesn't have a great strong arm, but he's really accurate, can anticipate well. So what does that skill set look like for that kid? And how can I, as a coach, build a scheme to fit that? And I think every offense has that ability. If you've got a kid that can throw the ball, it's not hard to put in concepts that are going to fit what he throws well. But
Right.
unfortunately, as a coaching staff, sometimes we don't have that play. Well, maybe you need it this year, with this kid. Or if he's a runner, maybe we're going to put more RPOs. But what I would caution coaches with is if you get that elite one who's good at both, don't put too much in. Like, find what he's good at and let's highlight those things. And then as you talk about develop, so once you find out the strength, now we're going to figure out how can we improve the areas that he throws the ball. Because in today's game, you're going to have to throw the ball at some point unless you are just dominant. So I know there's a guy listening to me that their team ran the ball 75 times and won the state championship and didn't throw the ball. There's that team in California. The article came out about, and understand I'm a very pro run the ball advocate guy. But unless you are dominant, at some point, you're going to have to throw the ball. And that's just the way the game has gone, in today's game. Sometimes you got to throw the ball a lot. But even if your offense doesn't call for an air raid attack, you're probably going to need to throw the ball in significant moments, in significant games to win. So get over that if you're not a big throw the ball guy right now, because you're going to have to do that. So we're going to figure out with this kid, how can we improve his throwing ability? How can we make this kid a better thrower within what we want him to do? Maybe that's throwing from the pocket on out routes or in cuts, or, maybe that's helping him anticipate quicker. That's a big skill a lot of quarterbacks don't have, where they wait for it to come open and then they throw it instead of anticipating and reading. And we'll get to that on the skill set part of this podcast. But how can we anticipate him or help him improve his throwing game? Maybe it's mechanical. Maybe it's something we can work with. Don't be too crazy. Don't go nuts with these kids, especially if you get them late. This year we got a quarterback late for us, senior. I hadn't played quarterback. I hadn't been in our program for a couple of years. Then I was in our program. He had not been a quarterback, but the guy we thought was the guy wasn't playing anymore. And then the next guy got hurt. So he's the guy now. His mechanics were horrible. And that's not his fault. He had just thrown the ball how he was comfortable. So it was down here on the side. He was a lefty. So there's a lot of things going there. So we just didn't want to overcoach him. So what are some things we can coach him with? Like, hey, let's just try to get our feet moving this direction. Let's not fall off the throw. Let's move towards the throw. Hey, let's try to, but I'm not going to try to all of a sudden get him to ball at the ear and ripping from here. Like, that's one, that really wasn't his skill set. And two, that would have probably made it worse at that point. So be careful when you start messing with how they throw it. But there are certain things when you coach throwing a ball one-on-one, like you need to be, our feet need to be moving forward as we throw. We need to throw with our hip. Those are things that every quarterback at every level can get better at. So that's what we're going to look at. We're also going to do a lot of competition and reps in our scheme. I want to know the more reps the kid can get, the better he's going to be. I mean, it's pretty simple. The more he can practice what you're asking him to do, the better he's going to be. And then competition. How's he going to handle third down, fourth down, off script? The more we can work that stuff in a setting where it's a practice or maybe a summer competition or whatever it is, where really no one really cares if you win or lose, and we can put him in some tough situations and see how he handles that, the better he's going to be when it really is that situation.
Yeah, that's something that I picked up on big time at Owasso this year was every practice day. I mean, you kind of do your stretch and your one-on-ones and you go right into a competition period, and it's generally team on team. So, they're obviously a big school that's 2 platoon. So it's your 1D and 1O out there for situational football, third and whatever. You get 5 attempts here, who can win most out of 5 or whatever. But the 2s go out and do the same competition as the 1s just did. And now you're watching that quarterback have to perform, right? And so it wasn't as much about pitting him against the other quarterback, because by the time I got over there, it was the end of the season. Like, we were looking at playoffs, less worried about figuring out who's going to be the guy. But absolutely, that can be the case early on, right? If you're going out and winning every one of those situations as the number 2 quarterback, we know you have less weapons. We know that the line isn't as good. We also know the competition is stout on the other side either, right? That defense isn't going to be the ones. And so if you can go out and dominate, and maybe you get some first team reps and kind of see where do you perform there, because you've said it many, many times, Coach, and that's, football games are really won and lost on third down, right? Like, the downs that matter, the off scheduled, off script downs. What are you going to do? And so if a kid can just continuously win that down, I don't know why you wouldn't put him in the game. Like, right? I mean, let him go out and do his thing.
I've had a lot of quarterbacks that were horrible drill quarterbacks. Like, if you come out and watch us practice, you're like, but all of a sudden we started going into team and competition and something's different. And then the opposite, unfortunately, has been true. Really good drill kid. Here comes the pressure. Ooh. And so you need to know who's your guy.
Yeah, we have some safeties like that this year on the freshman team that looked okay in drills, but man, they're gamers. You put them in competition 7-on-7 and they just come alive. So it's fun to watch kids do that. We'll jump in the last part here, Coach. What skills do you work, and kind of how do you teach them? So what skills are you trying to improve outside of just throwing motion, I suppose?
Sure. Big one's pocket awareness, just awareness of how to handle pressure. Especially if you're going to be a pocket passer. We've not really had a pocket passer the last really 2-3 years at Southside. And so it's been a bit, but I've got one coming up. And so we'll do a lot of things of, hey, what kind of pressure is this? How do I handle the pressure? We don't just want to flush and get out. How are we going to work our feet and get our feet set? And so we do a lot of that type of drill where, especially if we're trying to throw the ball down the field or we're working play action or whatever it might be, how am I going to handle pressure? We're going to dip underneath it, both hands, and then come back to it. A lot of times when we teach pressure releases, we teach to get underneath the pressure and then release, run to where it came from, because that's where the open space is going to be. If it's coming off the edge, dip and then get to the edge. If it's coming up the middle, slide out of the way and then step up in the pocket where it came from. So some pocket pressure type things. We're also going to work with our quarterbacks a lot of times on anticipatory type deals. Can I get them to process quicker? I think that's one skill set that is not taught enough. Can I get them to see things how I see things and anticipate throws quicker? So a lot of times, let's get them the ball and I want back foot hits the ground, ball ought to be out, or ball's in our hands and we're throwing a screen. It ought to be, I'm not even grabbing the laces, it's out, so how quickly can I get this kid to process what we're doing? So we're big on that. I like to have them point to their reads. They walk up and point to their reads. And we talked about footwork already. I'll kind of real quick on footwork. It can be different for each kid, so I don't want to go crazy here. But, a lot of times we talk about pointing the hallway. So the hallway is basically your back foot needs to be perpendicular to where you're trying to throw the ball. If I'm throwing the ball, on a screen, my foot ought to be like basically where it would be when I catch the snap. If I'm trying to throw the ball directly down the middle of the field, my hips ought to be flipped, and my back foot ought to be perpendicular to where I'm throwing the ball. We call that a hallway. If you can kind of get that right, you're going to help them a ton with not having balls that drift one way or the other, or having their arm not with their feet. You're basically trying to connect the two. And that's the easiest way I've found to teach it, is they understand, okay, so my back foot needs to be planted where I'm trying to throw the ball at like a 90-degree angle. And then again, we talk about anticipatory drills. I'm really big on, we read defenders. I know every quarterback has different things. I know the R4 system is real popular right now. It's a good system because you're talking the same language. Basically, what I would say is the kid needs to understand like what balls are coming out right now, what balls am I reading a defender, and then what is the timing on that. And so a lot of times, we work where a coach might be the defensive player. We're looking at him. We're not even looking at the receivers. That's in our system. I know it's a little bit different, but whatever your system is, he needs to be able to understand like the timing of when that comes out and what to do when that's not there. And so those are different skills we'll work with our quarterbacks. Of course, if we run the RPO stuff, I run a ton of that where we're reading a defender on the RPO and we're throwing off kind of off platform throws when you're doing that stuff.
Yeah, I think the understanding your route concepts is a huge one. Knowing, what am I right now? Like if I'm throwing on my third step, what am I hitting? What do I need to reset my feet and throw a backside route? What is that timing for each one of those throws, like kind of like what you said, and then also being able to progress the routes, right? And coaches can argue over that all day, right? Are you outside in, inside out? Are you reading a single defender? And everyone has a different philosophy. And at high school, I think that's good. You need to figure out what you think is the best and run with that. I can see, how all of them can work. Reading outside in, that's where the least defenders are. Inside out, that's where the gap is probably going to be pretty immediately, and you can read the coverage the best. If you're just reading one dude and trying to high-low him and make him wrong, well, that's way less for your quarterback to do. But what do you do if they roll a safety over the top and now they're both gone, right? So, I think they each have their pros and cons, if you will. But having a quarterback that understands, hey, I'm calling Y cross. Where are all the routes? Where do I expect it to open up? And then it kind of goes to my next point, and you said a little bit, Coach, and that's identifying coverages. Can you identify coverages at the line, compared or combined with your film study? Because any given play, they can hide whatever they're trying to do. But if they're a cover 3 team, they're probably going to run a lot of cover 3. So, I think you have to learn that too. Like, what are they trying to hide? If they're disguising, what does that look like? Does it look different? If they're pressing, but they're going to bail to cover 3, does that look different than pressing to play man, right? And so then adding those two together. So now that I know what defense I'm about to see, what coverage I'm about to see, and I understand this concept, now I know what my go-to route is out of these 3 or 4 or 5, or however many you're going to read or have as an option for a quarterback on that given play. I really like what you're doing with RPO stuff because I feel like it gets kids comfortable throwing the ball, builds that confidence, and the whole time we know they have a release valve of, hey, just hand the ball off, right? You're never wrong if you hand it off. And then I think that builds back into the actual passing concepts where, hey, your back is going to check release. He is your hot route, right? You can always dump it out to him. And now they're used to that. They're used to be able to just hand it off. Cool. I can just throw it to him. And it's just that kind of a confidence booster. So, that's the skills that I see that I constantly kind of talking to our quarterbacks about. Our quarterback coach is the OC, and he does a great job of it as well on the freshman side. And the varsity one, of course, is amazing. He's absolutely, he's so far above me. I don't even know what to ask him questions because he's got so much more football knowledge than me. But yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to do that. There's a lot of skills you need to work. And as long as you're creating a guy who's comfortable catching the ball, throwing the ball, I think you're doing okay, right? All right, Coach, we'll jump into our last part here, and that is what not to do as a coach. Why don't you tell us our lesson for the day?
Sure. So today's lesson on what not to do as a coach is basically to pick a quarterback off of what I call the eye test. Where you bring a kid in, he's tall, he's athletic, he's got a great arm. I'm not saying those aren't skills you'd like to have. Of course, if all things are equal, that's probably going to be your quarterback. But a lot of times as coaches, that's the kid we pick, and we don't look at the skills we mentioned at the top of the podcast. Like, can he make plays off script? Do the kids want to follow him? Is he a guy who handles pressure well? That's what I'm looking for first. Now, if all things are equal, of course, you pick the better athlete. Just like in any of these podcasts we're going to do for the next couple of weeks here, where we're talking about positions. Of course, there are certain traits physically we want to find, in every position. That being said, I've seen a lot of teams that have won with just a scrappy kid at quarterback who's just kind of a gamer. Quarterback, I think, is the most important position that you look at those other skills before you look at physical ability. Physical ability matters, of course. A guy that can just make plays and he's a super stud, of course, that matters. But there's a lot of times you can win a lot of games with a kid who just kind of understands the game of football. He can move the chains. Your offense functions better with him in there. So just be careful not to fall in love with the guy who passes the eye test. Make sure you're picking a quarterback based off of a guy who can actually run a football team.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Well, Coach, man, I think we've pretty much hit all the pieces here. I'm sure there's some guys out there like, I thought you were going to teach me how to teach my guy to read coverages. I think there's so much more that comes in before you get there, and that's a skill that everyone's going to do different, right? So by all means, reach out. You mentioned the R4 system. You've actually got a quarterback book for sale too, right?
Yeah, I think if you want to teach quarterback, it really depends on the system you're wanting to teach it in. And so obviously, I'm a gun T guy. If you're listening to this, we've got some material available on working with our quarterbacks. If you're an air raid guy, you need to go teach them how they teach them, because it's going to look a lot different, than how I teach them. Or a West Coast guy, they're different, or an option guy, they're different. For us, if you're wanting like quarterback work, we've got a lot of stuff drawn up, and we have a wide receiver manual. We're working on a quarterback manual now, but a lot of our playbook things talk about different drills, we would run with quarterbacks.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Coach, on social media, you can find me on Twitter or X at Coach Chambo OK. You can email me at chamberlainfootballconsulting@gmail.com. Where can we find you on social media?
All things FB Coach Simpson. So the website is fbcoachsimpson.com. That's where a lot of the materials are. You might be able to go get if you're wanting to kind of dig deeper in some of this stuff. At FB Coach Simpson on Twitter. And then you can find fbcoachsimpson@gmail.com is my email address. And then, of course, a lot of y'all might be familiar with all the Facebook groups we have.
Awesome. The podcast is at Coaching 101 Pod on the Twitter/X. We want to thank you for being a listener to the Coaching 101 podcast. We'll hope you join us next week as we continue to make the complex more simple. Please consider subscribing to the show so you'll always know when the new episodes are out. We'll leave you with this. It's hard to beat someone who never gives up. No matter the situation, find a way.